am back to discuss how I shoot for long exposure clouds and what I do in post-processing to bring it all together. So on this evening, which was last night, these clouds were moving at a pretty good pace from left to right. So I decided to throw on an 8-stop ND filter and shoot these at a longer exposure back to back. So the process here is I set up my camera with my 8-stop filter, and then I crank down on my aperture. So I think I was shooting around an f22. Yeah, it says right here, f22. So that lets less light in and allows me to push the exposure time even longer. So for this shot, I was doing a 15-second exposure. And what I do is I shoot back to back. So from here all the way to this shot, these are all back-to-back 15-second exposures. And you can see there's some motion in the clouds from one exposure to the next exposure. So once I've got those shots, I import them to Lightroom. And I usually try to span a period of a couple of minutes, 5 minutes. So that's why I did back-to-back shots of 15 seconds. So in Lightroom, what I'll do is I'll make my basic adjustments here over on the right-hand side panels for one image. And depending on how quickly the light's changing, in this case it was changing pretty quickly, you may have to brighten up the later exposures as it gets darker. I usually do that in camera while I'm shooting so that I can keep them pretty even by looking at my histogram. That way I don't have to do it here in the Lightroom basic adjustments. So I make my adjustments, pull down highlights, increase shadows, what have you. Then I sync all of them up. And so from here we're going to select all of our sky exposures. And then we're going to right click, edit in Adobe Photoshop, but you want to open them as layers. Okay, so once all of the images are imported or layered into Photoshop, and this may take a while depending on how many images you are and what kind of computer you're running, the first thing you may want to do is auto-align all of the layers if you had any movement in between your photos. And you can do that by selecting however many layers you have, going up to Edit, and going down to Auto-Align Layers. I like to keep it on auto. And then you click OK. In my case, the tripod stayed pretty steady. I'm also just using this, when I do this technique, just using it for the sky exposure. So you'll notice here we've got a lot of movement in this grass, this wheat grass that I was using as a foreground. And I'm not concerned about that because I have another exposure where I focus stacked here and here that I can blend in later. So once you have all the images, you want to select them all, right click, and then you're going to want to convert to a smart object. So this is another task that takes Photoshop a little while. Okay, so once the images have been combined into a smart object, we're going to then select Layer, Smart Objects, Stack Mode. So this chooses the type of stacking that this layer, that this smart object is doing. So currently it's showing the top image, and what we want, just to explain this, we want to change the stack mode. Instead of showing the top image, we want it to show an average of all the pixels of all the exposures. So because we get this moving cloud, an average stack mode is going to leave this nice long exposure look in the clouds. So that's when we're going to Layer, Smart Objects, Stack Mode, Mean Stack Mode. You're going to select this. Once again, depending on how many images you're dealing with, this task can also take Photoshop a little while. So once that's finished, you can see the final product here. It's the mean blend of all the images, and it looks fantastic in my opinion. So this would be your base sky exposure, and from here I would blend this in just like I do any other exposure blending into my foreground, which I have focus stacked in this case. So thanks for checking in. If you have any questions, please shoot me a message on my Instagram right here, or send me an email on my website.